Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is Jesus Predicts the Temple Destruction, and is taken from the 24th chapter of Matthew, verses 1 through 14. Now, the chapters 24 and 25 of Matthew is part of what is referred to as the Olivet Discourse. And it gets the name because it took place on the Mount of Olives, and that's right outside of Jerusalem. Now, and this 24th chapter is about prophecy of the end time, prophecy of the end time. Now, also, this chapter here, well, actually, the Olivet Discourse is Jesus' final week of his earthly ministry. Jesus' final week of his earthly ministry, just before his arrest and his crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. This is Jesus' last discourse. And we're going to go into our lesson here. Our lesson has three outlines. The first outline is looming destruction. That is the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem. And that's verses 1 and 2. Actually, well, the looming destruction is verses 1 through 3, 1, 2, and 3. Now, the second outline is coming hardships, and that's verses 4 through 12 of this 24th chapter of Matthew. Now, the third outline is verses 13 and 14, and it's reassuring victories. Okay, let's go back to our first outline here, which is entitled Looming Destruction. That's verses 1 through 3 of the 24th chapter of Matthew. But let's start, it's the 24th chapter of Matthew, verses 1 through 3, but let's pick up in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, and let's set the stage here. Okay, in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, starting at verse 37, we're going to look at verse 37, 38, and 39 of chapter 23, setting the stage. Okay, as I said, this is Jesus' last discourse, or his final week of earthly ministry. And his disciples, they're at the temple in Jerusalem. And verse 37 says, this is Jesus speaking, it's in red. It says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem." So Jesus is expressing sorrow. Jesus has been contending with the religious leaders, the Jewish people, all basically for the 3.5 years. And he's expressing sorrow that they have rejected him. And let's read it. Let's read it. Verse 37. "O Jerusalem, O Jerusalem," expressing sorrow. Thou that killest the prophet, this is he's talking to the Jews here. Thou that killest the prophet and stone them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Basically, I have been pleading with you, but you have rejected me. And he's expressing sorrow. Let's go to verse 38. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. We're talking about that is the temple. Your house is left unto you desolate. Verse 39. For I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth till ye shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. So Jesus is exiting the temple grounds. He's pleaded with them, yet they have rejected him. So basically, okay, this is my last plea to you. I'm leaving. He says, for I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth. You will not see me in the flesh as you see me now. No more. Till ye shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Okay, now this is our lesson picks up in that was chapter 23, the last three verses of chapter 23. Now we go into chapter 24. Okay, and as I said, this is part of the Olivet Discourse, chapter 24 and 25. Okay, we started in chapter 24. The first outline is loom of destruction, and that's verses 1, 2, 3. And let's go there. It says, then Jesus went out and he departed from the temple. As I said, this is final week. So he departs from the temple. Now he goes a little ways away, and his disciples came to him to show him the building of the temple. Basically, as they are walking away, it says right there, Jesus went out and departed from the temple. As they are walking away from the temple, okay, and the disciples came to show him the building of the temple. Take a look at this temple. Now, this again is the reconstructed temple, not the first temple that Solomon built. You know, the first temple was destroyed and it was rebuilt, okay? But then Herod had made modifications to the temple. So it was much more glorious than the second temple initially was. We talked about that before. So, but Herod had made additional modifications to the temple, and it was now very much more beautiful than it was at the introduction of the second temple. So this is the modified, renewed temple that they are taking a look at, and the disciples uh, came to show him the building of the temple. Take a look at this; it's magnificent. And let's look at verse 2. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, therefore shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Okay, in other words, Jesus makes a prediction. This is before it happened now. Now, as of now, because the temple was in fact, this temple was in fact destroyed in AD 70. So this time when Jesus is making this prophecy, this prediction, it is not AD 70. So the temple is still standing. And Jesus said in verse 2, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be torn down. In other words, brick by brick, this temple, this magnificent temple that you see here will be utterly destroyed. This temple will fall. And now that was a shock to them. That was a shock to them. And verse 3. Okay, let's go to verse 3. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, like I said, this is the Olivet Discourse, took place on the Mount of Olives, just a little way, as they say, a stone's throw from Jerusalem, the temple, where the temple sit. The disciples came unto him privately saying, the disciples came to him privately. Now, obviously, he was teaching the multitude and all that. Now the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of that coming and the end of the world? So basically, the disciples asked him three questions. Let's go look at them again. He said, tell us when. When is this temple going to be destroyed? Tell us when. That's the first question. When? Now we know the when now to be, not at a time, but AD 70. That's the when. Now the second question, and the disciples understood that we asking you three distinct questions. The first question is, when will this destruction happen? And as again, we know it happened in AD 70. Okay, that's the first question. When? And the second question is, and what shall be the signs of thy coming? So the second question is, what are the signs of your second coming? That's the second question. And the third question is, when shall be the end of the world? Now, that is to be understood as, when is the end of this present age? Not the end of the world as we thinking about it, the end of the world. That's it. No, when would be the end of the world, or when would be the end of this age? So three questions. When will the temple be destroyed? The second question is, what shall be the sign of thy second coming? That's the second question. And the third question is, when is the end of the age? When will the end of the age? And he's going to answer the rest of the lesson. Going to be talking about the second and the third question. Let's go there. So we know that prediction as it relates to the temple shall fall. The temple will be utterly destroyed. And we know that prediction did come true. That prophecy did come true in AD 70. The Romans destroyed it, and they tore it down and burned it up. Okay, all the gold and everything melted. And legend has it, or history has it, that the destruction was so devastating that it's hard to tell where the foundation of the walls were. That's how complete the destruction of the temple was. Okay, so let's go to our second outline, which is common hardship. Okay, and this goes to the second question: is the signs of Jesus' return? Okay, that's the second question. What shall be the signs of your return? Now, basically, so we're talking about what will happen between his ascension and his second coming. The ascension and the second coming. Let's go to the first verse in our second outline, and we're going to look at verse 4 and 5. Then Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed. These are talking. This is where Jesus began to list the signs that will precede the second coming. These are signs that will precede the second coming. Let's go to verse 4 and 5. Jesus answered and said unto him, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, say, I'm the Christ, and deceive many. Okay? These are the signs. Many will come and say, I'm the Christ, and deceive many. Let's go to verse 6. That was 4 and 5. Let's go to verse 6. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. These are signs. see that ye not be troubled. For these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Let's continue with the signs in verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in divers places. Verse 8. All these things are the beginning of sorrow. Okay, so we are witnessing now, today, all of these signs. Now, you might say false prophet, we know they've been around for a long time. And you go to wars and rumors of wars. Okay, what's the other one? Nation rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and famines and pestilence and earthquake. Now, you say, well, we've been having earthquake for a long time. And yes, we have. Pestilence and famine, but it's the frequency and the intensity is they are more frequent and they're more intense. So the point is, we've been having these, but as you see the frequency increase, the intensity increase, that lets us know that his second coming is closer now than it has been. Okay, it's talking about these things is what's going to happen prior to his second coming. Okay, and we are, as we look at these verses here, we are experiencing all of those things. But it also said these are the beginning of sorrow. So here are the signs. Here are the signs right here. But again, as I said, we see these signs occurring more frequent and with more intensity. So we know clearly that his coming is, as they say, right around the corner. Is near. Okay. So now he also gives additional signs in verses 9 through 12. And we're going to read those. There are additional signs. Let's read 9. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted. In other words, believers. This is believers are going to be persecuted. They shall offer you up to be delivered, to be afflicted. They shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my namesake. So believers will undergo extreme persecution. Believers will undergo extreme persecution. And verse 10, and many shall, and then shall many be offended and betray one another and shall hate one another. So these are the things that believers will undergo. And as I said, are undergoing. We are undergoing all of these things, and as far as the signs about the wars, rumors of war, pestilence, earthquake, and divers places, and the frequency and intensity is increasing as we speak right now. Okay, and it says, verse 8, these are just the beginning of sorrow. Okay, so these are the signs. So that's hard answer to the second question, okay, about what shall be the signs of that coming. And he's given a sign. Here, there's a sign. And as I said, these signs are taking place today, right now, as we speak. Okay. But now our third outline, he leaves a promise. He gives us a promise. He gives us a promise. Although all of these things are going to happen, these are some of the signs that will happen before the second coming, before his second coming. Okay, but let's go to this third outline, which gives us a promise. It says reassuring victories. Okay, that's verses 13 and 14 of the 24th chapter of Matthew here. Okay, but he that shall endure unto the end shall be saved. In other words, all of these things will happen, especially we talked about in verses 9 through 12, how the believers will undergo extreme persecution. Believers will undergo extreme persecution. But, verse 13 said, but he that shall endure unto the end shall be saved. In other words, even though we go through these things, even though we experience these things, however, those who persevere shall be saved. Those that endure shall be saved. Okay, shall be spared. That's the promise that we have as believers. We that endure, said, in he that endure unto the end shall be saved, shall be spared. Okay. Okay, now we go to verse 14, which is our last verse in the lesson, but we're going to cover a few more verses that's not in our lesson after we read verse 14. It says, and this gospel of the kingdom. So the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. In other words, Jesus is alive. The gospel message, the message of the kingdom shall be preached, given everyone, the entire world. It says preached in all of the world for a witness, given everyone opportunity to be saved. In other words, salvation is to everyone. And the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the entire world, okay, before his second coming. It's going to be preached, given everyone. In other words, he's not going to come back and say, well, I didn't have an opportunity to hear the gospel of the kingdom. Yes, you did, because he's making a promise here, and the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world. So salvation is to everyone, and salvation will be made accessible to everyone before his second coming, before the second coming. So no one will have an excuse that, well, I didn't hear the gospel. The gospel didn't come to my part of the world. Okay, so that's verse 14. But and verse 14 says, and we go to verse 15, which again, like I said, is not in our lesson, but we read verse 15 from the Bible here. When ye therefore, this is Jesus speaking, it's in red. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, that which was spoken by in Daniel, the 11th chapter, 30 verse 31. Okay, it talks about that. Start at verse 15. And let's look at a few verses here. That's this is how terrible it's going to be. Neither, verse 18, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothing, and woe unto them that are with child, and them that give suck. And this is talking about the tribulation, prior to the tribulation period. Okay, the abomination, desolation. Okay, that's leading up to the tribulation period. Okay, that's what that is referring to. But pray that ye flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Okay, and verse 21, talk about the tribulation. For there shall come a great tribulation, which such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever will be. Now, this is talking about tribulation, verse 22. And except those days shall be shortened. This is talking about that period. There shall no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. If the days will not be shortened, nobody will be saved. Let's go to verse 23. For any man shall say unto you, Lo, here's the Christ, or Christ is here or there, believe it not. For there shall rise false Christs, false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. In other words, we talked about false prophets earlier. Now, even if they false prophets are producing signs, well, yeah, I was over there even doing some great signs and wonders. They don't believe it. Now, let me give you the test of a true prophet. The test of a true prophet is a two-pronged test. First of all, the one prong, and it must be both prongs. The one prong is it must come to pass. It must be true. It must come to pass. That's the first prong. The second prong, it has to agree with God's word. It has to meet both tests. So even though, in other words, there will be false prophets coming that they will be so smooth. It says it right here. Let's read it again. It says, let's read it again in verse 24. There shall rise false Christ, false prophets, and false Christ and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. In other words, they will be so smooth that they will even fool the Christians. They will be so smooth. So just because they showing signs and wonders and all of this, they were smooth. It tells you, don't believe them. As I said, the test of a true prophet is true prong. It has to come to true. And if it doesn't line up, is it does not agree with God's word, it's false. It's a false prophet. That's the test. It has to agree. And talking about, like I said, Daniel's abomination, desolation, and all of that, the tribulation period. If unless the days be shortened, no flesh will be saved. We read it there. We read it there in verse 22. Except those days be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. This is Jesus' words, and it's in red. For the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. But for that, these people will be so smooth and fool the very elect. Okay, so Jesus is warning, giving us warning that don't believe that. Okay, don't believe false prophets. They show it, that Christ is over here, this man is over here, a woman is over here, but boy, they doing miracles. They're doing great signs and wonders. But and another scripture said, try the spirit by the spirit. Don't believe it. It tells you right there. It tells you clear and black and white, or red and white, that there will be false prophets, false Christ that will come, and they will be so smooth that they would even fool the very elect. So that's our lesson today. Jesus predicts the temple destruction. Again, as I said, when he predicted it, it hadn't happened, but it did in fact happen. And that's what one thing you can be assured of, what the Lord said, it will come to pass. And that's our lesson today. We'd like to thank you for watching. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.